I've watched people lose years of their lives arguing with reality, trying to convince someone to show up differently, to care deeper, to choose them fully. And the tragedy isn't that the other person didn't change. The tragedy is that they paused their own growth while waiting, and life does not wait. Life keeps moving, with or without your permission. Attention is energy with direction, and when your direction is scattered, your power feels diluted. But when you reclaim it, when you decide consciously that not every message requires a response, not every provocation deserves a reaction, not every misunderstanding needs clarification, you start to feel something rare and beautiful: sovereignty. There is a deep spiritual intelligence in knowing when to be silent, because silence is not empty, it is fertile. It is where intuition speaks. It is where clarity sharpens. It is where you finally hear your own voice again after months or years of noise. I remember a time when I thought closure came from one last conversation, one more explanation, one final chance to be understood. But closure doesn't come from them. It comes from the moment you decide your life is worth more than the chaos. And that decision is quiet, internal, and incredibly powerful. When you stop feeding what hurts you, it doesn't immediately disappear, but it weakens, like a fire without oxygen. And in that space, you begin to notice things you couldn't see before: your resilience, your new strength, the dreams you put on hold because you were too busy managing someone else's emotions. This is where self-focus becomes sacred practice, not vanity, not selfishness, but stewardship of the soul, because you all away, and both outcomes are information. Silence becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see in it. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first. It confronts not just others but you. It asks you to sit with your own feelings without outsourcing them, to self-soothe instead of seeking reassurance, to trust that your value does not depend on constant engagement. And this is only scratching the surface, because the lessons ahead go even deeper into how silence transforms healing, discipline, and purpose. So stay with me, because missing the final points would mean missing the full picture. There is a quiet confidence that grows when you stop announcing your moves and start making them. When you let results speak instead of explanations, when you let your consistency answer questions you no longer feel the need to address. Silence sharpens your focus. It removes the static so you can see patterns instead of isolated moments, intentions instead of words, truth instead of performance. And yes, there will be moments when silence feels lonely, when you wonder if you should reach out, clarify, soften. But loneliness is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you've outgrown an old way of relating. Growth is quiet before it is visible, and the most profound shifts in your life will rarely come with applause. Silence is also deeply spiritual. Every wisdom tradition understands this. Prayer begins in silence. Meditation deepens in silence. Insight arrives in silence, because silence is the language of the soul. And when you give yourself permission to be silent, you are giving your soul room to breathe. You begin to realize that not every thought needs to be spoken, not every emotion needs to be acted on, not every moment needs to be shared, and this restraint is not shrinking, it is refinement. You are becoming more intentional, more precise, more aligned. And if you're feeling this resonate, if something in you is softening and strengthening at the same time, stay until the end, because the lessons ahead build on this power and take it further into healing and self-mastery, and you will regret missing that. Silence teaches you patience, and patience teaches you trust. Trust in timing, trust in yourself, trust that what is meant for you does not require force. When you stop forcing, you stop bleeding energy. And suddenly you have space for creativity, for joy, for depth, for rest. You are no longer constantly available to be interrupted, and that alone changes your life. Silence is not about disappearing. It's about becoming so rooted that you no longer sway with every external breeze. It's about understanding that your presence is felt most strongly when it is not overextended. And as you practice this, gently, imperfectly, you'll notice something extraordinary. The world begins to meet you differently. Conversations become more intentional. Relationships more honest. Your inner world more spacious. This is the quiet power no one teaches you. The kind that doesn't announce itself but transforms everything it touches. And this is only the second step. What comes next will challenge how you see healing, responsibility, and purpose itself. So stay with me, because the real shift is just beginning. Your healing does not need their participation. And I want you to breathe that in slowly, because this realization is both creating a life that is happening now. There is a spiritual maturity in understanding that some people are not meant to walk with you into your healed life. They were part of the lesson, not the destination. And lessons by their nature end. They do not need to apologize to be complete. They need to be understood. When you take responsibility for your healing, you step into authorship of your story. And authors do not wait for their characters to approve the ending. This shift is subtle but profound. And if you're feeling it now, stay with me, because the lessons ahead build on this truth and take it further into discipline, purpose, and inner mastery. And you'll regret missing the final points. There is also a deep compassion that emerges when you heal independently, not just for yourself, but for others. Because you begin to see that people hurt from their own unhealed places. Not because you are unworthy, but because they were unaware. This doesn't justify their behavior, but it releases you from personalizing it, and that release is freedom. Imagine carrying a heavy bag for miles, convinced that someone else needs to help you put it down, only to realize you've been strong enough to set it down yourself the entire time. That moment of realization is both heartbreaking and empowering, because you grieve the time spent waiting and you celebrate the strength you didn't know you had. Healing without them means you learn to self-soothe instead of self-abandon, to process emotions instead of suppressing them, to feel fully without demanding resolution from the outside. It means you build an inner home that is stable, so even when relationships shift, your foundation remains intact. And yes, there will be moments when the old ache resurfaces, when a memory catches you off guard, when you wonder if things could have been different. But healing is not linear, and those moments are not failures, they are invitations to choose yourself again. Each time you do, the wound loses more of its grip. This is where true resilience is born, not from pretending you weren't hurt, but from refusing to let the hurt decide who you become. When you stop waiting for their participation, you create space. Space for joy, for clarity, for relationships that meet you where you are, not where you were wounded. You stop carrying emotional debts that were never yours to pay. And listen closely now, because this matters. Healing yourself does not make you cold, closed, or hardened. It makes you discerning. It allows you to love without losing yourself, to give without depletion, to connect without attachment to outcome. This is not the end of the journey, it is the threshold. And what comes next will challenge how you see discipline, gratitude, and purpose itself. So stay until the end, because the lessons ahead are even more powerful, and missing them would mean stopping just before the real transformation begins. Healing that doesn't require their participation is the kind that lasts, the kind that rewires your relationship with pain, the kind that teaches you that you are not broken, you are becoming, and once you understand that, you no longer wait for permission to live fully. You simply do, Discipline is self-respect in action, and this is where many people misunderstand the work. Because discipline has been painted as something harsh, rigid, punishing, something ion to move forward. There was a time when I believed discipline would trap me, make me less free, but the opposite is true. Discipline creates freedom by reducing chaos. When you know what you will and will not tolerate, when you know how you start and end your days, when you know the non-negotiables that protect your energy, life becomes simpler, clearer, lighter. Discipline is choosing rest without guilt, work without resentment, growth without drama. It's understanding that your future self is built by the habits your present self practices quietly, repeatedly, patiently. And this is where self-respect becomes visible. Not in words, not in affirmations, but in action. In showing up for the workout even when no one sees. In closing the laptop when your body needs rest. In saying no to what distracts you so you can say yes to what fulfills you. Self-respect isn't loud, it's consistent. It doesn't need to announce itself because it is felt in the way you move through the world with steadiness instead of urgency. Discipline teaches you to delay gratification without denying joy, to choose alignment over impulse, to build something meaningful instead of chasing what's momentarily soothing. And listen carefully, because this part matters deeply. Discipline is not perfection. It allows for rest, mistakes, softness, and recalibration. The difference is that discipline brings you back. It doesn't let one bad day become a bad life. It says, begin again without shame. When you lack discipline, every emotion becomes a decision maker, and emotions are powerful but temporary. Discipline gives your life structure so your emotions can flow without controlling the outcome. It creates movement, but grounded forward motion. There will be days when discipline feels boring, repetitive, even lonely, but boredom is often the gateway to mastery. Mastery is not glamorous, it is built in repetition, and repetition over time becomes identity. Don't become disciplined by waiting to feel like a disciplined person. You become disciplined by doing disciplined things until they feel natural. This is how self-respect compounds. And I want to remind you gently, this is not the final lesson. What comes next will reveal how gratitude stabilizes discipline and how purpose gives it direction, and missing those insights would mean stopping halfway through the journey. So stay until the end. Discipline is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming consistent with who you already know you're meant to be. It's about closing the gap between intention and action. When you practice discipline from a place of self-respect, not self-punishment, it becomes sustainable, even nourishing. You start to feel proud, not because life is perfect, but because you are showing up honestly. And that pride is quiet, steady, unshakable. Discipline is how you turn self-love from an idea into a lived experience, how you translate belief into behavior, how you prove to yourself that you are worthy of your own effort. This is the work that transforms potential into reality, and it prepares you for the deeper truths ahead, truths about gratitude, faith, and purpose that will reshape the way you see your life. So keep listening, keep leaning in, because this is where momentum builds, and what follows will take everything you've learned so far and turn it into something lasting, and brave enough to follow the answer even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. Choosing yourself is often misunderstood as selfishness, but selfishness takes from others. Self-honoring restores you so you can give without resentment. When you choose yourself, you stop performing your life and start inhabiting it. You no longer chase validation as proof that you're on the right path. You feel alignment in your body. A quiet steadiness that replaces anxiety. Think of purpose like a muscle. It strengthens with use. Every time you choose what aligns, even in small ways, that muscle grows stronger. Every time you ignore your intuition, it weakens. And over time, those small choices accumulate into a life that feels intentional instead of accidental. Many people wait to feel confident before choosing themselves, but confidence is not a prerequisite, it is a byproduct. Confidence grows when you keep your word to yourself, when your actions match your values, when you stop negotiating with your inner truth. Purpose reveals itself not in moments of grand certainty, but in moments of deep honesty. It shows up when you admit that something no longer fits, when you acknowledge a longing you've been dismissing, when you allow yourself to want more without apologizing for it. Spiritually, choosing yourself is an act of faith. It is trusting that the life meant for you will not require self-erasure. It is believing that you were designed with intention, and that honoring that design is not arrogance, but responsibility. There is a sacred order to a life lived in alignment, and when you choose yourself, you step back into that order. Opportunities begin to rearrange. Relationships are right. Purpose is not static, it is responsive. It moves as you move. When you choose yourself, you stop seeing change as failure and start seeing it as feedback. You become a student of your own life, paying attention to what expands you and what contracts you. That awareness is fertile ground for purpose. And here is something deeply important. Purpose does not always look impressive from the outside. Sometimes it looks like choosing rest over burnout, honesty over harmony, depth over speed. Sometimes it looks like walking away before the damage becomes permanent. Sometimes it looks like starting again when it would be easier to stay. Purpose is not about how your life looks. It's about how it feels to live it. When you choose yourself consistently, your life begins to feel like it belongs to you. And that sense of ownership is incredibly grounding. You stop waiting for permission to take up space. You stop shrinking to fit rooms that were never built for you. You stop asking for signs and start becoming one. Purpose also requires courage, because choosing yourself will test your attachment to being liked, understood, and approved of. There will be moments when choosing yourself feels like standing alone, but solitude is not emptiness. It is alignment without interference. In that space, you discover that your worth is not fragile, that your direction does not need consensus, that your life is allowed to be led from the inside out. And this is where purpose becomes service. Not the kind that depletes you, but the kind that flows naturally from wholeness. When you choose yourself, you don't become less generous, you become more effective. You give from overflow instead.